counter offer we ended up accepting, and I met my husband.
At that time, immigration is what formed this country. You know, is all these different ideas and different philosophies.
My father and David were like two peas in a pod. They loved each other. Gloria will tell you they absolutely loved each other.
So the question that you have to ask yourself is not only do you have to challenge yourself to remember this history, but you also have to ask yourself, who will write yours?
And that's where home plate was. And if you hit it to left field, there was a chicken coop in left field. My name is Leo Schoffer.
My name is Irving Jacoby. Grew up on a chicken farm. My parents were Holocaust survivors, and they started on a chicken farm and seized the greatest opportunities available to them by this great country. And they were resilient because they had faced horrible situations in the Holocaust. I'm extremely proud of them. I went through public school, Rutgers University, where I did my undergraduate work, George Mason University Law School, practiced law for over 30 years, have 3 children and 4 grandchildren.
My parents were Sam and Sara Schoffer. They were both born in the town of, at that time it was called Vilna. Today it's called Vilnius, the capital of Lithuania. The Holocaust came to Vilna. It started in 1939, but actually in 1941 when the Germans came, and they survived the Holocaust as partisans in the woods around the city of Vilna, and they survived and went to a displaced persons camp, and following that displaced persons camp experience, through sponsorship by people in America, they came to the United States in 1948. Our early lives, my sister was actually born in Vilna. However, I was born in 1952 after my parents immigrated to the United States on a farm. My parents and Irv's parents actually lived together on the same farm for about a year. Following my years on the farm, I went on to college at Rutgers also, and to Hofstra Law School, and I came back after schooling to this community where I began to work as a lawyer and in my family business, which is the real estate development business. You know, we have in our generation a lot of stories and anecdotes, and I'm sure we could go on for hours with them, but one of the reasons being is that I know there are some people, there are some survivors who don't like to talk about their experience and shy away from that. But in our house, it was just the opposite. It almost seemed as though whatever we began talking about, in the end, we ended up talking about the Holocaust and the partisans and the old days in Europe. It didn't matter where we started, that's where we ended, because there was always some connection with what we were doing in life to those stories, and they always went back to those stories. So I grew up as a very, very young boy just hearing all kinds of stories. And I knew that the stories were true because they always told them exactly the same way. And 30 years later, the stories were told the exact same way. So that's one thing I wanted to share with you.
I can share an anecdote which I think is revealing about my father's character. He lost a wife and 2 children. He had 3 children. 2 of them were murdered, and his wife was murdered. But one day, we were walking down the street in Tel Aviv, in Israel, and a lady was walking past us the other way, and she started looking into his face in a quizzical way and studying his face. And I said in Yiddish, "Papa, for was guckt sie auf die Ose?" Dad, why is she looking at you like that? And he said, "Face nicht? I don't know." Then I noticed with peripheral vision that she had circled around and was coming back towards us. And then she immediately dropped to her knees and started kissing his feet. And she said, "You saved you saved me in Auschwitz. You gave me some bread here and there, little pieces of bread, and you saved my life. I don't know what to say to you. I don't know how to thank you." And he just, he was very nice. He noticed she didn't have a lot of money, gave her some money, and wished her well, and she went on her way. I have another anecdote. He was setting up, he worked in the kitchen in Auschwitz. He was a baker. He opened a bakery in Munich right after the war. And the silverware wasn't placed exactly the way it was supposed to be. So the Nazi officers, a kid did it, a busboy young fella, and he didn't do it correctly. And the Nazis apparently were just going to shoot him. And my father said, no, I did it. And they took him in the back, and he had to disrobe and roll around in the snow for about a half hour. And they thought he was going to die because of it, but he didn't. He was tough as nails. He was a boxer and an athlete. And he traveled in many circles. When our oldest son, was bar mitzvahed, I received a very warm telegram from the sitting Prime Minister Menachem Begin about my father, which I take great pride in. I take great pride in his resilience, his strength, and his character, as well as my mother, who was from Vilnius, as Leo outlined.
The other thing is, just the fact that they survived and what they went through to survive, being in the woods and being in the partisans, is just an amazing thing to me. They were married in the woods. There was a chuppah there that they created in the woods, and they were married there as members of the partisan under a chuppah in the woods. And every day they had, not every day, but many days, they had missions and they had responsibilities and they had challenges that they were required to do. And I would always hear the stories about these different challenges that they had to go through. And they did them and they survived. And my father would always tell me that it didn't matter what he was told to do, because he just assumed that he was going to die anyway. And it was just a question of when he was going to die and where he was going to die. That's the only thing that maybe he had any ability to control. So that during those years, during the war, he was a young man and he just had this strong feeling for revenge for his parents, and he needed to express these feelings of revenge, which later in life he was not proud of, and he spoke a different way about those feelings of revenge. But during those years in the partisans, that's what he was interested in doing, is getting something in return for the loss of his parents. There obviously are stories about specifically, going on missions to blow up, train tracks, and going on missions to rob from the people in a neighboring town food and bring it back to the partisans, so the partisans had something to eat. And then there's, the incredible story just pre the partisans, where they were in a ghetto in Vilna, the very famous Vilna Ghetto, and all the Jews in Vilna were collected and put into, and my parents were in a room with 50 people, one room, and that's how they lived. And every day my father was sent out to a slave labor camp for work, and then at the end of the day he was brought back into the camp. And the whole idea was during the day to try to steal some food or get some food or provisions that they could, illegally bring back into the ghetto. And there was a time there where they had heard that the ghetto was going to be liquidated by the Germans and everybody was going to be taken to concentration camps. And at that point, many of the younger people in the ghetto decided that they were going to let that happen to them. So they decided to escape from the city, and they did that through the underground sewer systems, which led out into the fields outside of the city, and that's how they got out. The older people, like some of my grandparents, weren't inclined to do that. They felt that somehow, everything was going to be fine and they were not going to be murdered, and they decided to stay, but many of the young people didn't want to take their risk, and they escaped from the ghetto through these sewer lines.
It was just a minute to minute. If you looked at a Nazi the wrong way, no problem, you get a bullet. So you did what you had to do to get to that next minute. And hopefully the minutes will mount up and you'll make it to liberation. And my father was liberated at Buchenwald by the American GIs. And my mother, also from Vilna, was liberated. She was from a family of 9 children, including herself, with two parents, all murdered except for her. And I met a lady that told me a similar story about my mother, that she shared some of her provisions with her that kept her alive. So I was very proud of their character, their ability to survive, the resilience to start over again under those circumstances and the things that they saw and experienced are things that people shouldn't see and experience. But they did. They came out the other side of it, so to speak. And I would sit with my father, and we would watch the honeymooners and laugh. And I would think to myself, how can he do that? I mean, how can a man go through what he did and he laugh so easily and tell a joke and be humorous and be such a friendly, good person? And my mother as well, Leo, knew my parents. She was particularly fond of him. I suspected she liked him more than me half the time. But they got along very well. And it's just unimaginable. You grow up early, though, when you hear your parents have nightmares in the middle of the night. And you're a kid, 4, 5, 6 years old, and you're thinking, what the heck's going on? And things get explained to you, age appropriate, of course, because the most horrific examples, kids they're incapable of grasping and comprehending what went on there and how people would do such things. But I have the utmost respect for my parents and Leo's parents and all the survivors. Well, my father owned a bakery in Munich shortly after the war, and it was very successful. He had a villa up in the mountains. He had a chauffeur, not this one, but he had someone to drive him around. He was very successful. And my mother said, I want to go to America. So he went from that environment, and Leo is exactly right. They were not chicken farmers. My father had a perfume store in Berlin between World War I and World War II. And he was a sophisticated guy. He traveled in wide circles. So it was all new to them.
I'd like to say that after the war, like Irv's parents, my father tried to do things to make money. Okay, he had a daughter. My sister was born in 1945, so he already had a daughter. So they started to work in Europe, much like Irv's father. And my father, it was a natural businessman. He's always buying and selling, and he's always taking a train somewhere and buying chocolate in Switzerland and bringing it back to Munich. He had a place at number 2 Max Weber Plaza, which I visited a few years ago, where they lived in Munich. And he would bring things back. a couple things that he did were not after the war, was not particularly legal, and he got arrested a couple of times and got put in jail overnight for going and buying stuff and reselling it because they were very tight on those type of things, particularly with the Jewish survivors. But the interesting story that I want to tell you is so that he saved up a lot of money and he was starting to do, starting to do something for himself. But my mother only wanted to come to America. So they came to America and they had this little suitcase with a little bit of cash in it. To them it was a lot of cash, but it was a little bit of cash, this money that my father had made in Europe after the war selling. And my parents didn't come in New York. They came in on a ship called the General Hahn to Boston Harbor because the people that had supported them, the Taub family, their ancestors lived in Boston. So my parents came into Boston. And they had my sister, who was, a 3-year-old baby at the time. So when they got to the dock, they always told me it was just like a mad rush. It was just like a mad scene. They didn't know where to go or what to do. But the Taubes were there to pick them up. So finally, after they got through, I guess, registration or immigration or whatever they had that time, and they allowed them to get in. The Taubes were there, and they picked them up to take them to their house. And, my sister was there. My mother was worried about, my sister. And then, my father said, where's the bag of their money, everything that they had saved and everything that they had? And my mother said, I was taking care of Luba, that's my sister, didn't you have it? He said, no, I don't have it. So, they go nuts and they go right back to the dock to look for it. And by that time, everybody had left. It was hours later, and the dock was empty. But sitting on a bench in the dock was the little bag. And they opened up the little bag, and there in the bag was everything. The money was there. Nobody had taken a dollar. So I used to say to my father, you see, that was the sign. Mm-hmm. That was the sign that you were in the right place and you were going to be okay. Mm-hmm. That bag that was there and nobody took it, and it was waiting for you to come back and get it. In my case, you ask about how my parents coped with it. I think their way of coping with it was to actually talk about it to us, talk about it to their friends, and to deal with it, but not to put it behind them and ignore it, but to constantly talk about it. That was their way of coping with it. And the one thing that I saw in them is that, we call them survivors, and they survived partially because of luck. They were just in the right place at the right time, and other people were in the wrong place at the wrong time. Mm-hmm. It was just a matter of luck who survived and who didn't survive. But I could see in them, the way they went about their daily lives, the way they handled their businesses, that they had like a survivor mentality. Mm-hmm. They knew how to deal with problems, handle whatever issues there were, and they had that kind of mentality that they could make it, that they, no matter what they were going to be faced with, they had already been faced with the worst of all, the Holocaust.
Perspective.
And they were going to be able to make it in this country and make it for their children because they had this ability, which is part of the reason why they were survivors, in addition to the luck that they had.
The word perspective, because that's the word that springs to my mind. They had a perspective in dealing with whatever confronted them, and they could deal with it in a very admirable and honorable way.
My parents were not people from a farm in Europe. They were city people. When they came here and went to a farm, that was a big change in lifestyle. And for my parents, they didn't like the farm life. And to them, it was just a transition for them until they could get to the next stage, to the next phase, because the old joke is that chickens speak all languages, and an immigrant can start a chicken farm. We didn't know anything else other than that, so we really didn't have much to compare it with, other than the homes of other survivors. But I have to say, for the most part, the homes were really nice homes. It's not like they were shacks or something like that. They were nice homes. After we lived with the Jacobys and then we moved to our next farm, my father built the house and he built the chicken coops and he built the stand on the highway at which we sold chickens and eggs. So in terms of our living, it was very nice. It was middle class America, as far as I knew. It was no different than Leave It to Beaver. Okay, in terms of the house. What was different was the farm life and watching how hard our parents worked. How early they got up in the morning, how they worked all day, how they picked eggs and candled eggs and delivered eggs and chickens to their customers. That's what we saw, is just how hard they worked. I remember my father, we had these boxes, there were crates of frozen chickens. Do you remember those crates of frozen chicken? Yeah. They must have weighed like 200 pounds a crate. And I just remember watching my father stack these crates of frozen chickens, in this room. And it just, when I watched them, I just couldn't believe it. We felt like, at least I felt like, we had everything. My sister, who was older and born in Europe and had other issues growing up, she didn't feel quite the way I did. She was a little bit more resentful of living on the farm. But in my case, I found a way to like it. We left the farm when my last year, I was 10 years old when we left the farm. So I hadn't reached the age yet where I could really, I used to help out people. We had people to work, and I used to go into the chicken coops and help them pick eggs and help them candle eggs. But it was more, I was doing it kind of out of fun than I was that I had a specific job. And I would just help out in the stand where we sold eggs and dealt with the customers and things like that. And I would also go with my father, who had a truck, and he used to go to Atlantic City, and he used to deliver eggs and chickens in Atlantic City. And it's right around where Stockton is now. There were some streets there, right around Annapolis Avenue there, and in that area, Elberon, where my father used to deliver eggs. And I'm going to tell you one story. So one year we had this old rickety truck, and the door was open, and this is a true story. You're not going to believe it, but he had some wire around it to keep the door shut or something. So he stopped for some reason, and I actually fell out of the truck on the Black Horse Pike. Now I'm on the side of the road on the Black Horse Pike here, okay? And then my father didn't realize that he continued home another mile or two to our house. And my mother said, where's Label? That's my Yiddish name, Leo. Where's Label? And my father said, oh my God. Yeah, he was so tired. He had been up since like 6 o'clock in the morning, working all day. And then at night he went to deliver the eggs, and he even lost track, and they had to come back, and they found me on the side of the road on the Black Horse Pike waiting for them to pick me up. Today, you could go to jail for something like that.
When I was young, I remember my brother is about 5 years older than me, and my parents would go into coops and do what was needed in the coops. I was too young. So I would stay in the house, and I wanted to participate. I wanted to contribute. So I would fold clothes, I would make the bed, I would dust, I would do all those kind of household chores. And when my parents came back into the house, they would say, "Hey, look what Izzy did." That's my nickname. He helped us out here, and that was gave me a sense of pride and accomplishment that I was able to do something constructive. And I did also used to sell eggs, as Leo did. And Mr. Sutton, the history teacher, He used to buy eggs from us, and he always got an extra dozen. I did well in history. Very nice man. He's missed.
Yes, he is missed. Chester Sutton.
Chester C. I also have a brother that was born in Europe before he came over. And we played a lot of sports, which Leo will remember. But the thing that I think of now is the consistent determination to improve themselves, which was reflected in the home. There was artwork, there were books, there were other mechanisms by which you could improve yourself. There was an emphasis on education. I remember one time I wanted to get a new baseball glove, and I forget the cost, $10, whatever it was, and I asked for my parents, can I get the money for a new glove? And they said, doesn't David, that's my brother's name, doesn't he have a glove? Can you use his? Can you borrow one? And I was all right with that, because, we didn't just throw money out. 2 minutes later, my brother David comes into the room, and he says, our history teacher, Mr. Sutton, he's selling encyclopedias. He's selling encyclopedias. And my mother says, how much? $275, whatever the cost was. Order it tomorrow. And I was a youngster, and that stuck in my mind. I knew there was always an emphasis on education. When my brother Dave and I would come out of the coops collecting eggs or whatever, I'd see my father reading. He was always reading. He was very astute, and he could discuss politics and history and a lot of things at a very high level. And I was always picking his brain. And he would always encourage us, education is the way you want to go. This is what you got to do. And we knew that we couldn't replace those that were lost. Physically, it was an impossibility, a physical impossibility. We could not replace them. But we could make something of ourselves. We could do something productive with our lives, and perhaps become a source of pride that would lift their spirits a little bit. And, we had our fun, but, you didn't have to drag us out of jail in the middle of the night. We knew our limits. We knew what we wanted to do. It was also, in a sense, a determination. We both grew up to be lawyers, but it was instilled, and we responded to it, and we took it in the right way. And I think we made our parents proud.
They were proud to be Americans. It was very important for them to speak English and to improve their English and to improve their writing skills and to improve their reading skills and to be assimilated into the American society and not to be a burden on the American society, but to help the American society and to help others.
To have respect for the American culture, to have respect for the American person and what he or she stands for, and to what lengths that person might go to preserve freedom for others, and to be part of a great society. So to do that properly, you want to respect the rules and laws and try to contribute as best you can in whatever form, whatever gifts that you possess, and always work hard.
The people in Egg Harbor Township, I felt, were very welcoming to my parents. And when they were here and were dealing with them, they weren't treated as immigrants, they weren't treated as second-class citizens, but they were treated very nicely by the local community. And I think that you got to realize that they had left a community where their family had been for generations, probably hundreds and hundreds of years. And their homes were taken by their neighbors, and they were put in ghettos, and eventually they were chased out and murdered. And they come here to a new country, right, where they have no legacy at all for themselves and their own family, and they were welcomed and treated fairly by the people in the community in which they had chosen to live, in our case, Egg Harbor Township. And I think that that was a very important part of becoming American, is how they were treated, by their fellow Americans.
There was a family, the Taub family that Leo was speaking of, wonderful family, and they had a property, a good-sized property on West Jersey Avenue, and they allowed all the kids to go there and play sports, whatever season it was. It was for basketball, it was for baseball, for football. I'm a hockey fan. There was no hockey rink, but there was everything else that you could imagine, and we made good use of it, playing sports year-round, and we played until it got dark. You couldn't see anymore. Sports was very important to us. It was an outlet for feelings that we might have. It represented American society extremely well. It was a cornucopia of different feelings and emotions, and you could show your abilities if you had any, and try to improve yourself within the sports framework. Sports provides a lot of important values, that you take with you. For those that went and played sports later, you learned how to be a teammate. You learned how to take care of yourself. Not at the level that organized, but you were starting to get a semblance of what sports requires of you, and if you're in a position to meet those demands, and if you're inclined to do so.
The Taubes had about a 4-acre field that was on West Jersey. It was a big rectangular piece of property, and at the corner of the property on West Jersey, Mr. Taub created home plate. And he put home plate there and a backstop and everything, and that's where home plate was. And if you hit it to left field, there was a chicken coop in left field. And that was the thing, if you could hit it, and I remember, was it Jack Zoltak?
Max Kohlbauer.
Max Kohlbauer. Max Kohlbauer hit it over the chicken coop for a home run. Now, I don't know, maybe it was 200 feet. I don't know how many feet it was, but for us back then, he hit it over the chicken coop. And it's kind of an allegory, that here it is, this Holocaust survivor's child is here on this field on a farm, and one of the most memorable things he did was to hit a ball over a chicken coop.
He was our Hank Greenberg. You might remember that Hank Greenberg, a Jewish baseball player, he was challenging Babe Ruth's 60 home runs in one season, and he was getting close. And it was several games left, and he only needed 3 more home runs. But they wouldn't pitch to him. They would only roll the ball up, roll it on the ground, so he couldn't hit it. But we knew he was capable of doing it.
I want to say that we were religious, but we were not Orthodox religious, okay? So we did in our house celebrate it, and this is where it comes into the community. We know that there's this vast community of Holocaust survivors that lived here in South Jersey. So we were a community. We belonged to the same synagogues, and they would celebrate New Year's Eve together, and they would celebrate various holidays together, either in people's homes or at the synagogue, or sometimes they would rent out the gym at H. Russell Swift School, and they would have an event there. So there was a community of survivors that were had similar backgrounds and were following similar paths. So we used to spend a lot of time together on these holidays. And in addition to that, they spent a lot of time together. They used to get together on Saturday night and have card games that would go from house to house. And there was this game, it's kind of like a Jewish card game version of roulette. It's called Javat Deval. And they would go to each other's houses and they would play Javat Deval. The Holocaust Resource Center is named after my parents. And to me, that's a very, very, very important thing. Now, I don't look at the Holocaust Resource Center as the Sam and Sara Schoffer Holocaust Resource Center. I look at it as a Holocaust center for all the survivors, such as Irv's parents, Zelik and Rose. I look at it that my parents are an example of two survivors that came here married and established a new life for themselves, became part of the community, supported the community in a lot of different ways, and helped get this Holocaust Resource Center started. So I'm humbled by the fact that it's named after them, and I'm very proud of it. And I feel that it is something that has been given to me, naming this after my parents. It's something that I have to thank Stockton, and I have to thank the community, for thinking that this great Holocaust Center deserves to have the Schoffer name attached to it. But again, I always say that the Schoffers are just representatives of all the other people in this community who it could have been named after. So that's first comment, and I just feel honored by that. The second thing I need to say is that I mentioned earlier that my parents frequently spoke about, and that wasn't just to our family. When they would go out with their American friends, which they did a lot, or they were with other people at bar mitzvahs or at weddings or whatever, they would speak about it because people would ask them. People would, something would come up and they might say something, and then people would start asking them questions, and my parents were open to answering those questions. And part of the way that the Holocaust Center came about was because certain people, Judge Weinstein, Marcia Grossman, for example, those two people heard at a bar mitzvah table when sitting with my parents, heard some of these stories, and their reaction was, oh my God, we have to save these stories. We have to do something in our community to preserve these stories and to have this legacy go forward into the future. And partially as a result of my parents opening up and speaking with these people and motivating these people, the Holocaust Center came to be. And that's something that also I'm very proud of my parents for doing.
And we thank you for doing so.
Well, for me, I carry it forward through my involvement, obviously, with the Holocaust Resource Center, which is very, very important to me, and also in trying to get, my fellow second and third and fourth generation people to be involved as well, and to get involved and to remember their parents and grandparents by getting involved as well.
I'm self-appointed public relations guy in the Jewish society. What I mean by that is sometimes when we meet people, I'll mention the fact. I won't be shy about mentioning the fact that my parents are Holocaust survivors. I might mention it in passing. I might mention it to make a point. I might mention it as a possible point of departure for further discussion. But I'll mention it, and sometimes even my wife will say, well, you don't need to get into that. I say, yeah, I like to see how people react. I like to see if there's a basic curiosity. Is there a basic level of knowledge about such things? I wonder about that, and that's, for me, the best way. I try not to bring it up in an awkward or hurtful way, or stinging way. I throw it out there, and if somebody wants to continue a conversation from that point, and I've gotten to some very excellent conversations where I've learned things. Because Leo will tell you that at heart, I practiced law for over 30 years, but I'm an educator at heart. I like to see people, I like to see the flash of knowledge in their eyes. That's just something I enjoy for whatever reason. I don't know why. But that would be it for me. Although I also served as vice president of our synagogue. I served as president of the Atlantic County chapter of Zionist Organization of America. I try to do some little things along the way. I try to know illustrious people like Irving and this gentleman to my left. Keeps me on my toes.
Well, there's several hopes. Number one, is obviously the hope that no type of Holocaust or genocide ever occurs. I mean, we are in the 21st century now. We are, no longer in the 19th century, the 16th century. And the thought of anything like this occurring again is so mind-blowing that you just have to, number one, keep people educated and have them understand what happened and why it happened and how it can be prevented from happening again. That's number one. Number two is also the importance of remembering who you are and where you came from and who your parents were and who your grandparents were and what they did and how that made you who you are today. That's an important part of this educational process as well. And the third thing is it should be something that helps bring people together. That we have, although they're not exactly the same, we have many things in common as far as our ancestors and our backgrounds are concerned. For example, the Jews and the Armenians have much in common. So it's important that we recognize what we all have in common with other races and religions and use that to form a bond to think about how we are the same more than how we are different.
There has to be a willingness to want to learn about it. Now, if there is an unwillingness, that would be a symptom of some sort of problem. What's the problem? Lack of respect? Where does lack of respect come from? Not being raised in a way that nurtures respect, where you have a family unit considered by many to be the cornerstone of Western civilization. So I think you'd have to have people have to want to learn about it, and for the right reasons. If they don't, the old saying about taking a horse to, what is it?
Water.
A horse to water, but you can't make them drink. I've been in classrooms where I've taught about the Holocaust. My mother and I went to a high school, Oakrest, and she explained her circumstances. She told everything, age appropriate. She didn't get into the horror stuff. But in the question and answer period after she spoke, a young lady in the back rose and said to my mother, "I think you're lying. You just want sympathy. That's all you want. This is all fake. This is all nonsense, lies." And all the teachers were standing on the side. And my mother just looked at the girl for a minute and said, "You know what? I wish you were right. I was just lying. And my 8 brothers and sisters and my parents and my cousins and all my relatives would be alive." And the teachers just, they were just overwhelmed with that response, as was I. But you have to want to learn. I can tell you what my mother said to the Oakrest High School students, not what she might have said, what she said. She said, "Don't just hate, blind hate. Don't just hate for no reason. Doesn't take you where you want to go." That's the lesson that she left during that question and answer period. That's the lesson that she wanted to impart at that time.
And don't take for granted what people tell you about other people or about races and religions. Do your own research. Mm-hmm. Look into things yourself. Question things so that you can find out the truth, because there's so much of this is based on lies and hate and not on the truth, that it's important to encourage people to seek the truth.
And be proud. Be proud of your Judaism.